Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome back to another low expectations video. Today we're going to be going over some decks that are currently in the format. We're going to talk about them, talk about their matchups, and see how they're doing. I'm Matt here with Josh and Kevin. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so where do we want to start? I guess we'll go ahead and
I guess we'll just start at the first one, right? Branded,
Sure.
talking about Branded right now.
yeah. How do we think
Uh,
Brandon's doing right now?
Funny thing is Branded lost Expulsion, but it has the new Albion Fusion guy. It definitely works a little bit different because it comes from Grave instead of Grave and Banished. In addition to that, it's an effect that happens on monster effect that happens on the opponent's turn instead of a trap card,
However, the
right?
monster can't be targeted, so it still dodges imperm, so it still gets hit by the same things as it would being Bestials and Bell.
No, because it does actually get targeted by Forbidden Droplet, which is seeing very fringe play. Most people aren't playing the Droplet because of cash right now, because you have to send stuff to the grave, and if they just end on a Rise Art Pass, Droplet does nothing. But, if Droplet ever comes back in the format, Droplet is just going to destroy that deck 100%. But that also being said, they also have other options like Dragoon. They have the Mirror Jade, as per usual. Guardian Chimera is still real. Masquerade is something that no one is playing right now, but it's very, very real. Tax Dragon wins games by itself. But I honestly think that the deck's a little inconsistent for my liking. Uh, to an extent, you have your same old, Aluber into Branded Fusion into whatever combo you want to do at the time. But Nightmare locking people has become significantly harder, or if it has become significantly harder, it requires your resources to go towards that instead of making that and a Mirror Jade, that and a Dragoon, right? So, I mean,
So
if
what do
I'm
you
going to
think
be
it
honest
is?
with you, I
It
would
just
say
loses
tier
too many
1.5.
things. I think it's
Yeah,
1.52. It's if Branded Fusion resolves, it's really good, obviously, but it's a deck that really can't play like hand traps or like a lot of go second cards because the engine's just too big,
Yeah, I
and
can
well,
it's
agree with
not
that.
the best engine in the room, and that kind of
yeah,
like hurts.
and my thing is, there's a lot of people who have moved away from playing the Despia packages and stuff because of the new cards, the Quem, the Cartesia, right?
Yeah,
And
they do
from
different
that,
things.
yeah, they do very different things. It's a very different deck. People have moved away from the Allure of Darkness build. They've moved away from Tragedy, which was a huge consistency piece, right? And it's not like that deck can play Prosperity like every other deck because it requires a lot of its extra deck, right? Um, Not to mention Renbrum is something that the deck desperately needed, but for some reason no one ever makes, right? The deck did not have a full-on negate before, and now it has a full-on negate and a reason to play stuff like Mercurier, right? But they're not, and that consistency has gone down a lot. However, it has allowed them to play through stuff like Droll, which is huge in this current format, right?
Yeah, I would
Uh,
say it's a good deck, but it's not like the top of the pyramid. And because there's a lot of hand traps in the format, it loses to like a lot of random stuff. Sometimes you go opening a
Bell.
Luber effect and you get hit by impermanence, like cool, pass turn. Like it's
right.
just like sometimes it's
Or
just a
yeah, Bell, Bestial, right? Like if you're going for the lock, you have to hope to God that they don't smell a Bestial. If they
yeah,
smell a Bestial coming from a mile away, you're dead, right?
yeah. I mean, it's still a very powerful deck. If again, if fusion resolves, like you probably win that game. And if they don't see stuff to counter you, like you should summon big guys, you burn them. Like it's a good deck. It's just not the
Mhm.
tier one threat that it could have been, and it could still be like depending on like room, like if hand traps are being played and stuff like that. But I think 1.5 is a safe spot for it.
Well, and before we even go into these next couple decks, we'll talk about like board breaking ability, right? Branded has some board breaking ability, but nowhere near the level of these other decks. Like
It basically has
being
to
able
see.
to make Zeus is like immense for so many decks, right? And you can't do that in this strategy, right?
Yeah, you're just locked out. I mean, if they see Super Poly, they see Super Poly. But like besides that, it's like they have to hope all their stuff resolves to like
And
really
even
be able to
then,
push.
yeah, even then, some people are like sideboarding the super poly. They're not mainboarding that,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, moving on to Dragon Link. I personally think this deck is insane right now. It gets to play all the Bystials, which can hit most decks in the format currently, and has that recursion based off of Branded Regained and keeps that card advantage. They also get to go in crazy Link plays, crazy Synchro plays. The deck gets to do just about whatever it wants.
Well, let's talk about an optimal end board for Dragon Link, right? Um, you're going to end on maybe a Spheres, but most likely the Link 5 Boral guy and like a Borload Savage, right? That's usually your standard, play right now. And
Yeah.
the Firewall Defensor helped out a lot, and I think that there's a lot of really cool stuff that helps make that deck, do some spicy things. But as we were talking, Droll's in the format, right? You get hit by a Droll, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the elephant in the room that no one's talking about yet. Uh, Kaiju's Kurikara, right? The
A lot of
moment you
bad
get
stuff.
hit with one of those, you just
I
spent
mean,
15 minutes making a board I sneezed on, right?
I don't know. I mean, also it loses to a Rise Heart a lot going second. Like that's they want their guys in the grave. That's a big problem considering
Talk,
a Rise Heart is going to be seen in a lot of decks.
talk about board breaking ability. Like that deck has almost none of it. It's they want to win the dice roll. If they don't win that dice roll, it's going to be hard in a lot of matchups, right?
A lot of times they just
Um,
roll. It's I think the Bestial control deck is it's kind of the same deck, but that's like almost like sees more
yeah,
representation just because it plays slower and it's okay not like opening crazy. Like if it goes seals in the trap, like that's really good. And then they try to womp you on the turn three. But it does have that consistency issue where sometimes you just don't see enough good plays. There are very telegraphed lines that we've, seen, but it does make really big guys, the crazy synchros, goddess, Dispatter are really good cards, and it does get to flex those spots.
if you
So it
like
definitely,
big dragons, it's not an awful deck, but I would say it's nowhere higher than tier two.
I would agree.
Yeah, I'd say it's tier 2, but I'd also say it's top of tier 2.
I can agree with that. What's your reasoning for that?
Just compared to some of the other decks I'm seeing here, I think it can outperform some of these other decks. I know its sprite matchup is pretty good. I don't know too much about its plant matchup. Its Vanquish Soul matchup, it's gonna keep taking away that Borger or that Mad Love from Grave before you get a chance to balance those elements. So just looking at it, it lab they have the Bystials. They get to take the ladies out before they get a chance to bounce and return back to hand. So I am looking at some of these other decks, and I can see its potential with its matchups to outperform some of these other decks, given the right situations.
It's a
I
deck
also think
that
we're not.
definitely. I was gonna say yeah, it has a good pilot that definitely helps. But like if Joey down the street picks it up because he sees dragons, like he may not have as good a
It's
time as he
Oh,
definitely
thinks he.
not a good
yeah,
baby's first
absolutely.
deck. Don't get me wrong.
It absolutely it is one of the hardest decks to actually perform with. And unfortunately, a lot of newer players coming into the game, they're like, "Oh, well, it's Yu-Gi-Oh! I've got big scary dragons. This has got to be the best deck of the format, right?" Um, but I'm going to tell you, if you're newer to the game and you don't understand interactions fully, don't pick this up. I 100% agree. It is not an easy deck to fight with right now. I think that the Bystials are cute, but I think that it's more well suited right now in the branded deck.
Uh, that's a fair point. I guess moving on to Fluandereeze. This is another deck I believe to be a very strong tier 2 contender. I don't see it being tier 1 or tier 1.5 at this current point in time. However, it is still making a case for itself even after the barrier statue ban.
It's really cool how the deck kind of settled in a weird place recently with not needing an extra deck. So in the Kashtira matchup, back when Diablosis was still around, it was a cute little thing where you don't have an extra deck, so they can't really start locking your zones turn one. I think that right now, the strongest card in that deck is unexplored winds by far.
100% agree. It's getting rid
Yeah,
of like their problem cards, like when even now Vanquish Soul is flipping Tikaboo, they get to tribute that off.
Oh yeah, any sort of floodgate that's an issue, um, and any sort of problem card that's going to continuously be there. Um, Absolutely, unexplored winds gets rid of it, but it also gets rid of cards that are not ready to be activated for their optimal timing. Right?
yeah.
Say you're playing against a back row deck, they've got a set back row that they need to save for a big swing. You just tribute it off for cost. They don't have an opportunity to do anything with it. But you have to have, I think, a lot better of a pilot than you used to because of the banning a barrier statue. And I think that you have to understand how to break a board. I think we've talked about this with the last two decks. Breaking a board is massive. Breaking a board with Fluwanderees is knowing where and how to use Ryza and where and how to use Unexplored
Apex,
Winds.
well, and I would even
Yeah.
say Apex Avion in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. If you summon it when they're not ready for it, it's a good card. I mean, the deck can play Shifter. It has the Heartbeat Trap to like stun you down, so it definitely has options. But it also loses to a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, literally, Summon Bird, Valor. If they don't have like an extender or the field spell, they just lose. And
And
going
you die
second,
to Droll. You die to Droll hands down. Droll shoots
you
all
have to
this.
hope you see Shifter.
Talking about extenders, this deck also has a hard time playing through Solemn Judgment. You know, going
I mean, most
second,
decks would. I
which
mean,
well, a lot of decks have the ability to have a one card starter where even if their first summon would get judgmented, they get to continue on with their plays, and without that field spell, if your Robina or your normal summon gets solemn, you're kind of dead in the water.
yeah,
Yeah, and on top of that, like it's having the extender or bricking entirely. Like there's no in between. You have one or the other. Your entire hand is dependent on whether or not I have Rabina or have a name and the field spell.
yeah. I think, I think the deck can definitely do things, but it's definitely lower on the tiers. I think low two, high three is a safe spot, and then
I
we
would
can
agree with
always
low
Okay.
too.
move stuff around.
I think that right there next to Dragon Link is perfectly fine right now. Probably under Dragon Link. But, I think that we used to joke around about how anyone could pick up flu and top with it, but I'm telling you right now that uh, right now I think you need to be a better player with flu than you used to be in order to make that deck work.
You have to draw really well,
You
like
do.
unironically.
Yeah,
So I guess
absolutely.
we were just talking about Diablosis and Flu being able to play without that extra deck. I guess moving on here with Kashtira, they did lose Diablosis. I think the deck is still incredibly playable. I think it is still probably the best deck in the room.
I would say
Um,
I don't know if it's the best deck in the room. Lose Rise Heart to one really hurts the grind. Like a lot of decks would play through the first one and then the second one would just like clean up the game. Obviously, Diablosis was like crazy, but a lot of players weren't even going that route.
I
Uh,
don't think how much people. I don't think people valued enough how much a Rise Heart to one actually hurt. Like everyone talked about Diablosis being gone. They were like, "Oh, it's okay. We were doing a Rise Heart pass anyways." Well, guess what? You only have one of those. When that thing is gone, you don't have as much recursion as you used to with that deck.
no, for sure. I mean, it still has big guys beats, which is very impactful. Unicorn and Fenrir are crazy cards. When a Rise Heart hits the board, it is impactful. I think it's still a tier one deck, but it's nowhere near as good as it was last format, obviously.
I think that unfortunately, I don't think it's the best deck in the room. I think it's the most respected deck in the room, and it's
It's
been
the
like that
most,
for a long
it'll be the
time.
most played deck at like nationals, just by
Oh yeah.
representation. So it's gonna get a whole bunch of tops based on that alone, and players will play it just because it's rather easy. I mean, a lot of your lines are pretty streamlined, so it doesn't hurt. I mean, yes, there's like different things you can do, but if you're just going a Rise R pass every game,
Yeah.
Right.
pretty streamlined.
Um,
And that I can
I also
understand.
think that in like this deck, you need to be playing certain tech cards like your Forbidden Lance in order to make sure that you survive. Right? Like everyone's ready for this deck. Even people who are also on this deck are ready for this deck. Like understanding that this is a very, very good deck, you also have a target on your back.
Well, with
Yeah,
things like
whenever
Dribble
you're
Tactics Talents right now in the format too, and the mandatory activation of a Rise Heart, it can lead to someone just taking it and making a really big Zeus.
I mean, tactics, book, even like imperm on your guy. If you don't have a way to stop it, like your first turn is very weak.
You need Lance. You need Lance.
You got to see it.
Right.
Sometimes it comes down
So
to did we see it?
that being said, I wouldn't move it any less than tier 1, though. Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah, it is.
100%
obviously.
agree. Uh,
So, but
next up,
yeah,
Next up, we have Labyrinth. Labyrinth making a name for itself, topping German Nats recently. I think everyone saw the clip of getting
Eradicator really good.
eradicated for 5.
Eradicator, Jesus
Um,
Christ.
you know, this deck, and I think specifically more the IKEA build, is able to do some crazy lines, allowing them to get out of awkward situations. Even in the face of an evenly matched, as soon as someone says enter battle phase, they're able to rip that evenly before it even gets a chance to be put on board.
Well, and you want to hear something funny? Lab used to be, you know, oh, hurdy-durdy-dur trap deck. This IKEA build has
It's like a combo
made
deck.
people, yeah, it's like a combo deck. That right there gives people, some actual skill expression with this deck. And I'm surprised, but I actually still want to put it at 1.5. And the reason being, I think that this deck, like Flu, lives and dies by your hands. It lives and dies by your bricks. If you don't see the welcome, big welcome. I mean, obviously, every single time I play against someone who's got it, they've got both. But if you only see one and that gets ashed, right? If you only see,
Floodgates and no
your
monsters.
floodgates and no monsters, right? Like they just boop, 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 you're dead, right?
I mean, it's I think a
I
little bit
think
even beyond that. I think with Stovey and Kuklok, they're able to make even their turn 0 plays really strong and put their opponent on nothing, depending on the situation.
Yeah, right. But
yeah,
every deck can win if it sees its like good cards, right? You're
Right.
wanting to see what happens when like you draw the suboptimal hand, and like it doesn't play that much like hand trap interaction, so like it really relies on its engine to win games, and it definitely can. And I think 1.5 is a good spot for it, but it still loses like if they don't see like the blowouts and they see your opponent sees like a lightning storm, like sometimes you just lose.
yeah. I think that it's a good deck. I think that it doesn't have the skill ceiling that a lot of other decks do, like maybe branded. But I think that even despite that, uh, there are a lot of good things for this deck,
Yeah, once the
right?
deck gets
And a lot of
rolling,
good things
like
going for it.
once the deck gets rolling, it's really hard to lose because you just like snowball advantage like super crazy.
So what are we thinking?
Okay.
Top of 1.5?
I would play this
Uh,
over branded
yeah,
personally,
I would say
but
top of 1.5, guaranteed. All right.
Uh, Moving on to Dinomorphia.
Zach's favorite deck. Uh,
Compared to Labyrinth, I don't think this trap deck. Granted, it still has its moments. I just don't think it really stands up compared to the better trap deck in the room. I know it has
So
Rexstrom and its ability to consistently make big beat sticks and recur traps, play the floodgates, but I still think it generically loses to a lot more than Lab does.
I would
funny
agree with that.
story. I actually want to play devil's advocate against you guys here and be on Zach's side. I just played this deck at the last regional, and oh my god, the deck plays itself, and it's disgusting when it does. Right? Like, I'm telling you right now, Trap Tracks, Wannabe, uh, and Intact coming in for this deck was everything the deck needed and more. Right? Intact was huge. Um, and I think that once we are like in a place where a Rise Heart Pass isn't like the biggest thing in the room, this deck becomes a real threat, and it even becomes an engine in other decks. I'm telling you right now, uh, it does not have a high skill ceiling because of the way it's being played right now. But once this deck starts rolling, there is no coming back, right?
It's one of
And
those decks where if they resolve the combo, they just win like 90% of the time because like it puts it into an unfair game state where your opponent just cannot do things. But it also
and
loses to a lot of stuff too. Like talents on like the big guy take their guy link it off, kill them, like you can just die out of nowhere. Time is always a problem because it does basically kill itself. Especially at larger events, people will slow play you, unfortunately. So that does become a problem, at least in its current state, right?
I did not have a single problem with someone slow playing me into time that entire event. The only time that I had an issue where I was about to go to time was because the guy had never read anything before, and I was explaining everything in every detail and what it did. And guy was wonderful, respectful dude. I was X11 before I left the event because we had stuff we needed to do with this deck. And the only draw that I had was Makonko because it was a direct counter to my deck. And the only loss that I had was to Lab, and that was because the guy just had everything and eradicated me for everything I was worth 2 games in a row.
Right, but
Like, I'm
comparatively,
telling you
Zach
right
was
now.
going into time with the deck and had those time issues. It is just a fact that comes up at these larger events, whether it's intentional or not. That time is going to be a factor. Even some of these more aggressive and sacky decks, they can still go into time given the right situation. I think just inherently having that time issue is a really big downside for this deck when trying to consider it to bring to a larger event.
I mean, if you go first
But
with 5 minutes left, like you feel real bad. Like you literally can't play your deck.
um, yes and no. Like,
I mean, you're
as
not
long
fusing,
as
and
you're
that's kind of your win condition.
I think you also need to play around with the time rules in mind with that deck,
I'm
right?
agreeing with
Like,
you. But like,
for example,
if you ever get put into the situation where you're going like game three is starting with like between 5 and 10 minutes, you're in a little bit of a pickle because
but
you want to
here's
go
the
first
thing,
to set
right?
up, or you have to go second to not do it.
With that deck, faster than anything, you're going to know whether or not you're going to win or lose that game. The only time that, you actually have like a 20-minute game is in like the trap mirror match. And even then, right, hey, this game is going to take too long. I'm going to concede early so we can go to game 3 and do this now. Right? Like, I'm telling you 100%, if you know how to scoop when you need to scoop, if you know that you're going to lose and you need to win that game 3, or if you're like, you know, doing things consistently, you can get through the time issue, right? Yes, people are going to time scum 100% of the time. You're going to find someone who's going to do it, right? But I think that if you can work through that issue, this deck can reward you in ways that you have no idea. Now, I'm not saying that it's a high tier on this list. I'm saying it is a real threat in the upcoming format. If a Rise Art is not in the format, and if Ash ever leaves, oh my god, you're running away with this deck.
But
I
we're
mean, that's
talking
fair.
about a
But I
realistic,
think in the
an
current
unrealistic
format,
situation. Ash is everywhere. Ash will probably always be everywhere. Ash is such a generic hand trap that it can hit every deck in
is
some capacity.
Zoo format wants to know your location. But besides that, yeah,
But we can't discount the fact that there was this kid that had never been to a locals before, never been to a regionals before, and top 16 a YCS with this deck.
So where do we want to put it on the list, though? Are we going to go three? Are we going to go two?
I,
I know Josh, you're a proponent. Do you want to go
I'm
higher?
going to agree tier 3. I'm going to agree tier 3, but
High tier
I'm
three,
going to
it
say
can
with a
definitely do
caveat,
things in the right hands.
with a star.
Yeah, I think that's really the best spot for it.
All right.
Now
Moving
another deck that
on.
nobody reads the cards. Anybody want to talk about Rika here?
Rico
Plant Gobert.
Plant.
Uh,
Um,
you want to hear something funny? Every single time I read a Rika card, I'm like, is this a custom card? What the hell is this? Right?
Deck really doesn't
Being
break.
able to tribute your opponent's stuff to search 2 cards is wild to me, right? Tribute your monster to imperm your other monster. I'm sorry. However, I'm going to say the same thing that I said about Dragon Link. It takes a very good pilot, and it is not a combo format. And because it's not a combo format, unless you are like really good with this deck, you're not going to make it.
I think that's really what it comes down to. It's a skill ceiling to an extent because the deck rewards good play, and if you mess up, you get put in bad positions. If hand traps are prevalent, there's a lot of like, ashing the summon off of the the Link one. There's a lot of good things that you could do against the deck. It does have unfair things they could do, tributing your opponent's monsters. The water art is really crazy, being able to look at your opponent's hands, stuff like that. It can do a lot of cool stuff, but I think it definitely is at probably tier 2-ish. I mean, maybe 1.5 if you really want to give it extra, but maybe not this format.
I'd
Okay.
agree with tier 2, but I think it's below D-Link, but above Fluenderees just due to its resilience.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
I think that I can agree with that, and I can agree with an argument for that. But like,
I mean, do you want to
I
put it over Dragon Link? Or do you want to go higher?
I think that it's in a better position than Dragon Link is right now. Funny enough,
I mean, it doesn't
I
lose to the Bystials, which Dragon Link does. Doesn't lose to
right,
Bell. There's a lot of, I mean, there's some stuff. But like,
and it
I mean,
does lose to Shifter to an extent, but it can play around it. I think it can play around the things that Dragon Link cannot, and that's what makes the deck better.
okay, I mean, I'm not opposed to putting it above Dragon Link. It's a very scary deck when you play against it. So,
Hmm.
and it can do a lot of good things. So I think that's a good spot.
Hmm. Sprite.
Sprite, the bread and butter, tried and true, old reliable.
If there is literally anyone in this room that is qualified to talk about Sprite, it's the three of us. So I'm going to tell you right now, Sprite's the best deck in the room. Guaranteed, it's the best deck in the room.
I think it
I
just
Like
has a lot
it
of
agree.
is,
flexibility in its variants specifically, which kind of makes me want to put it above Cash. For
it's
hire
as
Sprite,
good as
Sprite Runic Twin, Sprite for hire Runic, Pure Sprite, Melfi Sprite. It was playing the Gammas at one point, not only just as a hand trap, but as a level 2 extender.
and
Every
the
level two
slap
is a
on the
good card.
wrist of yeah, the slap on the wrist of Starter to 2 is like yeah, it hurts. It hurts consistency a lot. But I mean, I'm telling you right now that if you put a good player on Cash or a good player on Sprite, they're probably going to perform better with the Sprite deck. It is 100% as good as Cash, if not better. And then it also has a better skill ceiling. And the skill ceiling is everything when it comes to these tier lists. A good player with Sprite in their hands will win 98% of the time.
I mean, we'll have to
I don't
keep
know
an
about
eye out
98,
for it
but
right
like
now.
Sprite is definitely it has a great cash matchup too. Like if you think the room is going to be all cash, the Melfi version like just absolutely murders it. Like the whole
Oh,
interaction
it's disgusting.
the interaction with Caddy and the Melfi of the Forest is like absurd into cash. And I mean, I've been on this deck since like release. Me and Matt both have top eights at regionals with the deck. It can play so many hand traps and non-engine cards, and then gigantic resolving turns off so much stuff. It does so much.
I I have a regional invite with this deck when I was playing Gishki Sprite for the one weekend that it was available to me. I had no idea what I was doing. I was, pun intended, floundering like a fish, and I still ended up getting an invite out of that. Like I had no idea what was going on,
And that
and it
was
still
during tier
happened.
format at
I mean,
optimal
Elf
cash tier
Yeah,
for the
Elf,
a
elf.
Elf
hundred
kind of go
percent.
Bertha.
Yeah.
But even still, after that, like we've
Yeah,
done, all of us have done really well with the deck after Elf. It's just there's so much non-engine that you can run. The engine is really concise. I mean, one blue is like 4 cards. Like you just get so much advantage, and then you just kill
and
people.
you
It can play under
and
Droll. It might be a little bit awkward, but it still ends with a really strong end board with 1 to 2
You play under
negates.
Shifter too. I mean,
Plays
it's
under
not
shifter. You lose
great,
your
but
you can
beavers. Yeah.
literally play every tech card under the sun, right? Like it's got so much space. It's so flexible. It is 100% the best deck in the room, the best archetype at least.
and you have like 3 different ways to play it too. You could do Melfi, you could do Runic, you can do the for hire stuff. Like you have your options.
Well, not
Yes,
only
some are
that,
better than others, but
there's
you can
this
play
new
whatever you
tuner
want.
that people are going to be experimenting around with the new set release. And
Oh,
people are even
Synchron.
the synchron, and people are looking at the
Bestial
new
Sprite
OCG card that's coming
was
out too.
better in the OCG because they have Chaotic Ruler. That really is the thing, and that's a big difference in the deck. Also, Bestials aren't like great. I mean, they're good, but it's not like tier format where like they were like mandatory, and that really helped push the deck because they gave it the sixes that you needed to make your
Yeah,
eights like super
Well,
consistent.
it's getting this level
but
2 in Click and Echo shortly as well. That's going to make your opponent play with their hand revealed if it's linked off and given to them, which I think is cute. People want to experiment with it. it's just a different type of Ibly lock. However, it does turn off decks such as Vanquish Soul and having their whole hand revealed.
I mean, again, every level 2 becomes like, is this card good?
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say is literally Konami set a precedent with this deck where every level 2 that comes out, you're like, okay, how do I fit this in? Right?
Yeah, as
Like,
long as your guys are Jet and Blue are like alive and have more than like one, the deck is definitely playable.
yeah. So I definitely agree. It's definitely up there. I think, unfortunately, I love the deck more than anything else. It, if anything in this room needs to be hit on the next list, it's going to have to be Sprite.
Just based on representation and what it's doing, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's unfortunate,
Okay.
but this is the reality.
We thought it was dead last time too, and then Konami said nah.
So
And,
we take what
you
we can
know, a
get.
lot of
That's a
people
whole
thought it
nother
was,
format with Sprite.
Yeah.
and we thought it was dead when Elf died too. And then everyone tried to go, Elf at home with Bujinki
Well,
Ahashima.
that's the whole thing
But
too. Is that Elf Band really opened up the deck in ways that people didn't expect it to play into. You kind of removed the limiter when you got rid of Elf, and the deck kind of thrived without it in a way that wasn't possible before. When you felt, obligated to make Elf as the first play.
True, but if
yeah,
you give
and
it off, the deck is crazy.
yeah, if you give the deck Elf, then the deck's crazy. But I will say that without Elf, it is now you have to be a good player to perform.
Yeah, no, Elf carried games that you had no business winning. Now you actually need to like
Yeah.
play through boards and like find ways to kill them.
All
All right.
right, Sword Soul. I
Sword
think this
Soul.
deck is underrepresented and underappreciated right now.
It's too
I'm gonna
fair.
say I'm gonna say tier 1.5, but at the bottom it's tier 1.5, and I'm gonna tell you why. Yes, the deck is too fair, but the deck is consistent. It is a solved deck. It's been a solved deck for a long time, right? And it's been putting up numbers here, there, everywhere. It's kind of like, oh, here's also Sword Soul. Here's also Sword Soul. I think that unfortunately, in a shifter-based format with Arise Heart, with Shifter, with Droll, it's really difficult for it to perform well in those scenarios. But I think people have actually come up and proven, hey, even though our hard counters are here, we're still doing something, right? And everything that you hit it with, they have some opportunity to play through it. Oh, you nib me? Oh, well, now I have a non-effect monster to go through my Tenyi plays. Oh, you shifted me? Oh, well, now I'll banish my Tenyi from hand instead to get the effect, right? They have opportunities to play through stuff that good players can take, right? And I think that it performed very, very well last year at Nats at the American Nats. It won, if I'm not mistaken, due to rivalry of the Warlords, right? But it also was just hands down the best deck in the room, and stuff has come out that has power crept it a little bit, and that's what's holding it back,
Uh,
right?
I can agree
Um,
with this deck being at 1.5. However, I do believe it's actually above Branded in this case. I think Branded kind of relies upon two or three, so to speak, boss monsters, whereas Sword Soul gets these nice tech options and flexibility that unfortunately Branded doesn't always have access to.
I
I
still
think
think Brandon's
Branded
a
dies
better
higher.
deck, but Sword Soul does have the ability to play lots of non-engine. It does the same thing over and over, which is never a bad thing. It does sometimes lose to like one interaction if the hand is like not the greatest, and that can happen with how the deck is built. But it definitely wins games. The long one burn is relevant. Like the damage ceiling is like super low, and if they just stick one big guy, you just kind of die.
And unlike Masquerade, Longwan is still going to be played until the end of time because it's an actual core piece of the deck. So uh, I think that Sword Soul is kind of like in that spot where I can kind of interchange it with that. And to, kind of play devil's advocate and talk about Branded here a little bit, uh, I think Branded dies harder to certain stuff in certain plays. However, Branded also has more options to actually play other stuff, right? It has more not like outside of engine stuff, like it's going to be playing more in engine stuff, but it has more lines that it can go to make either Dragoon, to make.
It's more
Uh,
flexible. It's
it's
basically
more flexible.
yeah.
All right.
I definitely think it's a good deck. I mean, I personally would put it at the like high tier 2, not necessarily 1.5. But if you guys think it's 1.5, I'm not exactly gonna fight you. You know what I mean?
I
I could
I would
understand your
say
reasoning for tier two. Can you elaborate on it a little bit further though?
It's it's consistent and it does a lot of things, but it's still not as strong as these other decks. Branded just has like a win conditions. If you're going Labyrinth, like the deck can play all the broken cards basically, right? And I mean, yes, you're going like 1-on-1, but like I just don't think it's as good. Like it's
well,
always it does enough, but like I just think it doesn't have that extra oomph to like push it higher.
I also think that to put it on the same level as the other tier 2 decks would be unfair to Sword Soul. I think
Okay.
that uh, Dragon Link, Rika, and Fluandereeze all have harder times right now than Sword Soul does.
Okay. I mean, if you want to put it at 1.5, I'm not gonna fight you.
All right. The last deck we're gonna sit here and review is gonna be the new deck, everyone's favorite child, um, Vanquish Souls. It just came out a couple weeks ago, and it's performing. The deck does take some skill to go ahead and play. Takes good assessment and resource management. However, it is a towers deck at its core. It just wants to drop the Caesar, drop the Borger, try to get that card advantage. Try to keep you off, cards, as well as drop the Raisin and just nuke the column, or drop the Pantera and nuke the column. So there's some flexibility in that sense. But it is performing at all these European nationals going on right now.
So uh, I think that this is the hardest deck here to evaluate because I don't think that we've been around it long enough to see it. But I'm going to tell you right now, I think that the deck plays very differently. And this is from personal experience playing the deck. It plays very differently than every other deck I have ever played in Yu-Gi-Oh! Ever, full stop, period. It is different, and I think that that can account for a lot of its success. Um, but I also think that it's like the other, pretty good deck that we've admired. It is flexible. It's got a lot of different engines that it can play in it, and a lot of different tech that it can play in it, and stuff that synergizes very well. Um, but I think it lacks the amount of explosion that those other decks have, right? Like, if I'm building up a board with Sprite, I've got like 4 or 5 interruptions. When I'm building up a board with Vanquish Souls, it feels like I'm playing, like almost like I'm playing Salamangreat, right?
You're playing a mid-range control deck is basically what it is. It wants to go draw 2 cards. It wants to set up its floodgates. It wants
Mhm.
to dodge your interaction to make you go neg. So like it's in a weird
Border
spot. I
is
mean,
like Heat Soul.
yeah, it wins games right now a lot because people aren't familiar how to interact. So you get free wins because someone's like, "Oh, I'll just imprint your guy." And you're like, "Cool, tag out." And they just go neg one for no reason. A lot of times, sometimes that card does end your turn if you don't open the big guy. So like it's in a really weird spot where like it can be very good and it can be very mid at the same time.
Okay.
So how do you
So
feel about it overall?
It's as I said, the
It's
hardest
hard
thing
to
to
place.
evaluate here. I'm gonna say like I would want the guy inside me wants to put it at high tier 1.5, but I feel like the more the deck gets solved and the more I play the deck, the more I'm seeing the weaknesses that it has. It can be very bricky and very awkward to have certain hands just because you don't have certain attributes, right?
Well, and if they keep you
And
off your Raisin, or you don't open that Raisin, the whole deck becomes awkward for the rest of that game until you draw one.
Well, and there's so many different ways to get to Raisin, and people have been experimenting with Small World.
Durandal.
There's Durandal. I mean, just base Rhoda, right? But like, I think overall, um, it's just such a hard deck to see whether or not it's going to do well or not. And for that, I'm gonna have to say it's tier 2 until we see
More.
like
Yeah,
what
until we see
until we
more.
see more, right?
yeah, I
Until
mean
the
it gets
deck
new cards coming out in the next set too, which will help it. I think currently it's tier 2. again, it does win a lot based on unfamiliarity because the deck is what, like 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old. So that's
Mhm.
definitely helping it. It can do some very cool stuff with the dodging interactions and the burn and stuff like that. But there are definitely hands that, like, if they just stop your first play and you don't have attributes, you're just sitting there like, ah, this sucks. But then it
Looking
gets
at
to
it
be
from a
like,
tier 2 perspective, how do we feel about it compared to Plants or D-Link?
Okay, see, so I haven't actually, you know, interacted any of those matchups and to see like how it performs against them, or to see how it performs in comparison to them. But I mean, if I were to say like against some of the top decks, like Branded, against Labyrinth, against Cash, against Sprite, like the deck feels solid enough to where I don't know with our tier two and how we have it listed whether or not I can justify putting it in that tier two
I
with the
mean, do you
rest of
want to
those.
just put it at the bottom of 1.5 and say like it's got potential and it can? I mean, it can definitely do things. You both have played it. You both think it's a very good deck,
Um,
but it also doesn't have like
but
I'm
like
not saying
Josh was saying
limitation.
though, like it does have its issues. In some of these matchup, it kind of relies on that Tikaboo being the play. And then you play against it with Flu, and they tribute off your Tikaboo, and you're kind of, oh well, they're gonna go full combo, and I'm not gonna be able to catch up.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, right? Is if you get hit at the wrong spot, you just die. But you can dodge so much that sometimes it plays through it regardless. But if you
Not always.
Not
it's
always.
hard to tell, right? Like not every hand can do that, right?
Yeah.
Not every hand is going to reward you for being this, that, or whatever, doing good,
I
doing
mean,
this, doing that.
I
I
think that
played the deck and almost lost because I ashed someone at the optimal time,
because you
right?
lost your
Like,
fire. Yeah,
yeah,
you need your
because I
attributes
lost my fire.
to do your extra things, and then consistency is really the reason why some of these other decks are up there. I mean, Sprite is the most consistent deck in the room because any two guys gets you there. Cash, literally half your deck is a starter. Branded, you're not branded. I mean, yeah, branded too. There's a lot of starters. Lab, if you see
Yeah,
a trap, like the deck does what it
Well,
does.
like you were saying though,
and the same
Josh,
thing
you
with
ashed at
Swordful.
the optimal time. I belled, Runic, and I lost because of that. Because I lost my Earth, I had no way to get Earth back and no way to protect Caesar. Caesar got removed, and I lost on spot.
Yeah, you have to make a choice. Do I waste my attribute or do I just hold it so I have interaction? It's like really in a weird spot.
I
Is
think you have to be really, really good to make the deck work. And I know that that's like a consistent thing that I've been saying about a lot of these decks, but I think it takes a really good pilot. And I think that if you can make it work, absolutely go for it 100%. But it's just so different from everything else. You're going to have to unlearn a lot of the bad habits you've learned from every other deck,
Yeah, I wouldn't even call
right?
them bad habits. They're just different play styles.
Yeah, play styles that you've learned from every other deck,
Yeah.
right?
All right. Well, I think that about wraps up our tier list. Any final shifts that we want to make?
Yeah, I think everything looks pretty solid at where it's at. It saddens me to see Dynamorphia so low on this, but that's the reality of it. I agree 100% with everything that's on there.
Yeah, I think this is a good representation. I think all these decks, I think, will make tops at like the US Nats in a couple weeks. It's just going to be, who pilots the deck and who sees their cards at certain times ends up being the one who's going to take it.
All right. Well, thank you
Real
for
quick
joining
though,
us.
real quick more than anything, I do want to have an honorable mention in Sky Striker. We just saw that it top aided a original recently, and I think that deck is honestly a lot better than people give it credit for. And I think that that's a real contender. Do I think it's above tier two? No, but I also just wanted to throw that out there.
All
I
right.
don't know. Engaging to engage is crazy, but the deck's just not as good as it used to be.
I agree.
That's a conversation for another time. We'll have to see how it performs at Nats coming up. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good one.